Welcome back to the SoberFitGirl Podcast. Today we are going to be talking about shame, guilt, and not beating ourselves up if we touch the stove. Now, touching the stove at the SoberFitGirl program is what you would call in recovery a relapse. It's when you go back and drink, and at the SoberFitGirl program and as coaches, we really try to help our clients see when you go back and you drink is to see that failure as feedback, or take that lesson and reflect on it and turn it into a blessing. So being a coach, the head coach at SoberFitGirl, let's say a client does drink and they're in their Sober Curious program and they come to you and they're really upset. How would you coach that client to see that as a blessing?
Well, first of all, I get it because I've been there and I had an insane amount of shame and guilt about everything that I did and lived through when I was drinking. So I completely get when you're on day one, how much of that you're carrying. And the most important thing is to being patient with yourself and to give it time. Shame doesn't just melt away overnight and we just feel better one day. It's not that easy. It's not that simple. There was so much shame for me that took years and years of just doing things differently and sticking to my sobriety, even on the hard days, that it slowly started becoming less and less heavy. But there wasn't a day where I just woke up and I was like, wow, I'm healed. I'm done. Like, I don't feel that shame anymore. It was more of a gradual thing that I was letting go of. And truly, when you come to me and you say that, I will tell you, ask yourself, what is the thing that you value the most in an apology from somebody else? And to me, that has always been changed behavior. If somebody's coming to me and they've hurt me and they're apologizing with words, I honestly do not believe it until I see that their actions are matching their words. So now when we're flipping it back to us and we want to forgive ourselves for all of the things that we have done, all of the mistakes, all of the regret that we have, you have to do the same thing. You have to change your behavior. You have to stay strong in your sobriety over time, because that is how we prove to ourselves that the version of us that was making these mistakes and was just stuck in these cycles, she is not there anymore. She's different. She has been doing the work. She's been changing. And when we're meeting this version of ourselves and we're taking our mistakes as lessons instead of a reason to judge and to hate ourselves, that is the ultimate shift. That is when we can finally start letting go of all of the shame that we're carrying, because we're realizing that we needed to go through that to get to this place. And when I first started my sober journey, I was definitely I hated every mistake I've made. I was like, you know what? Like, there's no reason for that. But now I'm able to see that every single mistake I made, every single way that I hurt myself, it got me to this point to get sober, to change my life. And I'm able to look back now, years into it, with so much gratitude and happiness that I made these changes and I changed my behavior, which allowed me to forgive myself. So I think that's the biggest thing, is if you're on day one, you're not gonna just wake up on day two and you're gonna be like, all right, I get it, I see it. Like, it took months and years of consistent work and changing the things that I wanted to change to get to a point where I felt like I was able to forgive myself and to see the lessons. And I think that is one of the best things that we learn about in SoberFitGirl, is the blessings in the lessons. I was definitely never able to see the blessings and the lessons. How did you start noticing that there was shifts in seeing that something that you felt so shameful about turned out to be your biggest lesson?
I mean, there's so many blessings in my lessons. The biggest blessing is that if I didn't have all of these hardships in my life, I couldn't help another person. That's my biggest blessing. My story has become my greatest asset. I feel that I am so happy that I turned my pain into my purpose. I'm so happy that my story of my childhood, my story of my drinking shame has turned into something that I can share and help another person. That truly is my biggest blessing, is that, all of these things that I have gone through have become the number one tool to help someone else. That's the biggest thing I'm grateful for in sobriety and looking back at all the things, is that I can use it as something to help someone else. Now, one of the things might be shocking to hear is that I am so grateful for my hangovers. I am so grateful that the last time I drank alcohol was so horrific. I am so grateful that the last year that I drank alcohol, my mental health was going to complete crap. I'm so grateful that I had so much pain, and that's so shocking to hear, because it's like, why would you be grateful for your hangovers and your pain? It's because it put me into a place of desperation. It put me into a place of getting so sick and tired of being sick and tired that I said to myself, like, you won't see it as a blessing until, one, you use it to help someone else, and two, you see it as the reason that you made the change. My catastrophic consequences in my drinking got me sober. And it's the only way that someone from my experience can see it as a blessing is getting it reflected back to me. So let's say someone has a wedding let's say a sober fit girl has a wedding, and she goes into the wedding and she's like really doesn't want to drink alcohol. And she ends up getting drunk and blacked out and embarrassing herself. Instead of us being coaches that say, oh, you shouldn't have done that, you're bad, we say, okay, what did you learn? Well, person, place, was it a specific, area at the wedding? Was it a specific time at the wedding? Was it a specific conversation? What tools did you use? What tools did you not use? And then we reflect. And she learns. And let's say she has another wedding in 2 months and she stays completely sober. And she says, I'm grateful for that previous wedding because it taught me the tools that I needed to use at this wedding. That's how you start to see that the failure is the feedback. But you can only see that when you're reflecting on your previous drinking experiences. If you're not reflecting and you're not doing the work and you're not learning about your triggers, or let's say you're at a holiday and you're holiday at home, being around family is one of my biggest triggers, and it took me a really long time to not have cravings to drink around the holidays. But I reflect so much. I'm like, that conversation, maybe I need to leave home earlier, maybe I can't stay that many days. You start to see all of this feedback in certain situations as something you can learn from. And if you can use that experience as something to learn from, to make it, as you said, change behavior, it is a blessing. So just as much as I'm grateful for my hangovers, I know that there has been probably many specific situations before you got sober, Eva, that you can share that you are grateful for, that if someone's listening, they're like, how could you be grateful for your last drink? Were you grateful for your last drink?
Now, yes. Now, yes. Course. It took a while to get there, but I think, as crazy as it sounds, I was so grateful for my deteriorating mental health and those hospital trips to the, urgent care when I was feeling all of the symptoms. Like, I'm grateful for that now, because if those things didn't happen, then I would never wake up and realize that, like, I need to make a change. And at the time, I definitely was not grateful for that because like I said, I felt like I was dying in those moments. But hitting those lows is exactly what got me to a place where I needed to make a change. I was so desperate to change my life that I did, and if I just kept kind of floating through life and it didn't get as bad as it did, then I don't know if I would have made the changes. Like if my drinking, if I just didn't have such extreme lows, which I'm grateful for now, I don't know if I would ever get that urge to change my life. I think I'd just be like, whatever, my life isn't great, but it's also not horrible. So like all of those horrific moments of blacking out, having panic attacks, waking up and not knowing what happened, I was never grateful for in the moment. In fact, I was using that as a reason to just give up and keep going. So that's like the ultimate shift that happens for us is instead of taking these moments where you might touch the stove or you make a mistake as your reason to give up and to be hard on yourself, you're now taking it as a lesson and as evidence that like this life is not serving you anymore, and it motivates you to want to change. And when we start looking at these experiences as a reason to change instead of a reason to give up, then that's when we start noticing all of these amazing shifts happening and progress being made, even if you do touch the stove, even if you go into this wedding like Kat was saying and you drink, even if you didn't want to drink, you're coming out of it with more evidence of why drinking does not serve you. And my whole probably last year of drinking, I gathered so much evidence that when I got to the day that I decided to stop drinking, it was a case closed. I gathered all of the evidence I needed. I was done and I was ready to make a change. Now, a year before that, even a day before that, I wasn't there. I was waking up, I was hungover, and I was like, yeah, this is your life. You suck. You're never going to change. Keep going. Maybe it won't be as bad next time. That was exactly how I looked at it. And so now it's every single horrific thing that happened, every time I lost my phone, every single time I woke up and I created a mess, I checked my phone and I saw a bunch of drunk messages, a bunch of drunk calls. I woke up with, bruises and all of the horrible things that happened. I can look back now and be grateful, but it took a while. Like I said, you're not going to wake up and you're not going to be just happy that that bad thing happened to you, that you hit your rock bottom. And, it takes time to get to that point. But when you are able to take every single bad thing that happened to you and use it as a reason to motivate you for change, that's when you're going to start seeing the progress. And just remembering that like progress over perfection too, like it's not necessarily going to be this click in your head that it's like, okay, I'm going to change things now. You might need to go through more lessons. You might need to experience some more lows for you to get to that point. But the most important thing is that you're not giving up. I know that we share a lot about when we got sober and how we got to long-term sobriety, but can you think of a time when you were sober curious or you were trying to cut down on drinking, that you had this goal and you touched the stove and you ended up disappointing yourself? How did you handle that in your drinking days versus how you handle that now?
I mean, I feel like from my experience, I was just in so much self-hatred in my drinking days that if I ever made any mistake, I would go into self-abuse, over drinking, under eating, overeating, overtraining, whatever that looked like, until I started to get community. Now, the coolest and best thing about a community is it's going to supercharge your results. Reason being is because someone else's lesson can become not only their blessing, but your blessing too. In my drinking, yes, I had catastrophic consequences and I did hit a bottom, but I truly believe that I could have kept digging. Once I started to get community and I started reflecting and hearing other people's story, I saw in other people how they were farther along in a place of consequences, farther along on digging the hole deeper. So their story had become my blessing because I could see where I could have gone if I kept drinking. And so I think that's why it's so important to have community like SoberFitGirl or any sober program you're in and hearing other people's story, because if someone comes to SoberFitGirl and they might not have as bad as consequences as ours, they can hear our story and be like, oh, that's where my drinking's going to take me. And if someone in the community is another great example, I like saying weddings. If two people at SoberFitGirl are going to a wedding and one girl drinks at a wedding and she shares in the community, oh my God, I embarrassed myself. I can't believe I did this. I danced with this person I shouldn't have. I overshared. I fell. I embarrassed myself. The other girl who has a wedding coming up can say, oh, wow, I don't want that to happen to me. So I'm not going to drink at the wedding, because that girl starts sharing what she learned and her feedback from her failure, which again is not a failure, it's just feedback. That story becomes the other girl's blessing. So we can save ourselves from so much pain if we're listening to other people's share and triggers. I had a very hard time in my first year of sobriety digesting information. The only way I could digest information was hearing other people's experiences. I could process that easier. Okay, this happened to her when she drank. Oh, that happens to me when I drink. Oh, that's my trigger too. So that becomes my blessing. Also, hearing other people's story. I met this girl. I'm still friends with her, very, very close to her. She's in Bali currently, and we're going to have a breakfast on Monday. And she's one of my biggest blessings because I met her. She was a year sober, and she showed me what is possible. So her story became my blessing because it showed me what's available for me. Because I mean, if I didn't meet the people that I have met on my path in my drinking days, I would not be sober. I needed to hear other people's experience of what was possible. Also, my dad's passing and his, he died of alcoholism. Crazy to say this, but his story became one of my blessings, because if I kept drinking, more than likely in 20 years from now, he died at 59, I would have been there too, because my drinking became so progressive. And I just love to share that. Other people's, why community is so important, is to hear other people's stories, other people's lessons, because then it becomes your blessing. Is there anything specific that you can think of, Eva, that other person's lesson has become your blessing?
Yeah, I mean, I share how I have alcoholism in my family and just seeing how you can go different paths. I have an uncle who's sober for years, and that showed me that's possible. I have an uncle who died because of his drinking, and that shows me exactly it. To be honest, when I was having these panic attacks and I felt like my body was giving out, my head immediately went to it's happening to me. What happened to him is happening to me. So just looking at all their stories, and then my third uncle who is still in the cycles is like, that's exactly what would happen to me. Like I can learn from every single person. And this is something I really wanted to touch in this episode too, is that we have women of all ages. So we have women who are in their 20s Then we also have women that are in their 60s. There's a whole spectrum of like ages and places where people are at in life in SoberFitGirl. And the girls that are in their 20s might be questioning, is it too soon for me to be sober curious? I'm just, I'm young, I'm living my life. And that's exactly where I was. And when I got sober at 27, I was filled with so much regret about like, oh, I should have done this sooner. Like, why didn't I do this years ago? But I'm so grateful now that at 30 years old, I got sober when I did, because my late 20s were the most amazing, magical time. And I got so much done and I accomplished so much in that time versus my early 20s. And I have zero regrets about getting sober in my 20s. So if you're in your 20s, you're listening to this and you're like, oh, maybe when I'm in my 30s, like, why wait? Like, I'm just so happy I didn't wait. Even though I wished I even did it sooner, I'm just grateful that I chose to get sober in my 20s, because it helped me accomplish so much more and feel like, okay, even though I didn't get sober as soon as I would like, I got so much done versus my early 20s and my mid 20s, where I was just trying to survive and float through life. And now also to the women who are in their 50s and their 60s, or at any point, even if you're in your 30s or your 40s and you think it's too late for me, like I just made too many mistakes in my life, and like there's just no way that now I can live a life and build a life that I'm happy with. It's just too late for me. It's never too late. It's never too late to start over in life, no matter what it is. Sobriety, divorce, just moving, starting a new life at any point. Like, I mean, we even have this amazing woman in the community who shared yesterday, I'm starting a business and I'm going to do it. I know that I have so much fear. And I've been telling myself for so long that it's too late for me. I'm going to do it. And that's because she has been working on her sobriety and building that confidence. And you realize when you get sober, no matter what age you are, that it's not too early, it's not too late. You've gathered the evidence you needed at the time you needed, and you close the case on whether you want to be sober. And the life that you are going to live in your sobriety is going to make you realize that this is exactly how things had to happen, whether you're getting sober in your 20s or if you're getting sober in your 60s. You have a beautiful life to live in sobriety no matter what. And you're going to be able to reflect back at the lessons that you had to go through to get to that point. And, we can always be wishing that things went differently in our life, at whatever it is. We're always going to think back. Even in our sobriety, we can have moments where like, damn, I wish I never got married to this person. I wish I never even dated that person. I wish I never went into this career. I wish that I focused more on this. I wish I was a more present parent. You're always going to have these thoughts. But I love the saying, you can look back at your past, but don't stare at it. Because when we stare at it and we overthink and we keep focusing on the what ifs when it comes to maybe if I did this a different way, you're taking away from the present moment. You're taking away from the life you can live now and the future that you are building now. And we try to bring, as coaches, we try to bring everybody into the present. And even though we look back at the past as a reminder of what we don't want to go back to, we also try to bring people back into today and focusing on living the life you want to live and becoming the person that you want to become today, because that's what matters. And so the blessings and the lessons and our past is not meant to keep us stuck and to keep us filled with regret. And we're not meant to just focus on the past. We're meant to just look at the past, take what we learned from it, and move forward. And I think that has been the most powerful part of my journey too, is learning that like my past, I'm not defined by my past. And I know that one thing that has really made me proud about who I am and who I've become is you being so open about your past and your past mistakes, because, you know, on the outside looking in, somebody can look at you and be like, oh, well, maybe she had it easy. Maybe she didn't have to go through a lot. So, you know, I just want to ask you and have you share a little bit about how you know, embraced this new version of yourself in sobriety without being so harsh and judgmental. Like, how did you feel confident enough to start sharing your story so openly on social media and your mistakes? Because I mean, the video of you that went viral was you talking about waking up next to a stranger. And I know that that was terrifying for you to share, but how did you get to that point where you were like, you know what, I'm at a place now where I'm going to share it? Because to me, I mean, I was terrified to share anything about my sobriety for almost a year.
I think the biggest thing is that my story has become my greatest asset, like I was sharing, and it keeps me sober. You know, sharing my story and being involved in the sober communities keeps me sober. And before I shared on social media, I would share in person one-to-one, and I was starting to almost get the same high alcohol gave me by sharing my story and watching the lights come on for someone else. And it in turn, you know, that connection created like a really crazy dopamine hit. And I keep chasing that dopamine. It's a great dopamine hit. Helping someone else is like the best feeling ever. So for me personally, the more I share my story, the more it heals me, because there's parts of my story that I still haven't shared yet, that I'm not ready to share. And when I do share it, I know it will help someone else. And I think hearing that from me, it's, you don't have to, everything will come in due time. Whatever's supposed to come for you to heal at that time, it will come to you. I wish that I had spent my first 2 years of sobriety having a little bit more fun, to be honest. In my first 2 years of sobriety, I spent a lot of time dwelling on the fact that I wish I got sober sooner. I got sober at 30. And when I had my 1 year and my 2 year, I just sat and was so upset that I didn't get sober sooner. I wish, you know, I didn't have my 26, 27, 28, and 29 years were the most painful for me. And I was like, oh, I just wish I would have got sober sooner. But now I've come to realize in this last couple years that I couldn't have gotten sober sooner. I couldn't have made that decision. I had to touch the stove. I had to get those blessings and the lessons for me to make those changes, because you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And I love that so much, because if I look back at the synchronicities of how things of my story unfolded, I was doing the next right thing at each time, even if it was drinking again, because I received that lesson, and then I had a knowing of, okay, if I keep drinking, this is going to happen. Then I would drink again and something bad happened. And then I had that information and I kept going, and I really, truly was doing the best I could with the resources I had. And that's when things started to shift for me, and the freedom came, and the peace and the serenity, because everything just made sense. Because it's so easy for me to look back and say, I hate myself for doing that. I hate myself for doing that. But now I say, of course I did that. Of course I had a horrible toxic relationship with men. I had a really bad father figure growing up. So once I started to say, of course, that makes sense. I understand. Now I know that. That's this connects in that way. Freedom happened for me. And that's when I started sharing my story, was when I could let go of the past, see all of this information, and share, which in turn gives me more serenity, because I'm helping someone else. And that's the greatest gift. And I know that's the greatest gift for you too. So you obviously, you became a coach later on in your sobriety. Do you feel that you get a dopamine hit from helping someone else, and how does helping other people help your sobriety?
Absolutely. I think it's because I was also such a big people pleaser, and I was always like really hypersensitive to everybody around me and their emotions. Just with how I was growing up and raised, I became I wanted to take care of everybody around me in relationships, in friendships, and just life in general. And I think that this was truly a purpose for me, and the best way to also motivate me in my sobriety. And like you said, you shared earlier, listening to somebody on day one is a reminder to me on why I'm sober, because we can forget. And I have worked hard at trying to remember exactly why I'm doing this, even on the hard days. And if I was doing this alone and I didn't feel like I had a purpose, then I would be closer to a drink. I 100% would be closer to a drink. So as much as I want to show up for people and be a safe space for them, because I know that like we're all different, but you know, a lot of us don't have that support. I want to be that one person that like, you know, you can come to when it comes to your sobriety, even if you're surrounded by a bunch of normal drinkers. So it has given me so much purpose to help others and to have other people help me in turn. And so that's why, like, if you're listening and you are at a point where you either think it's too late for you or it's too soon for you, and, you know, maybe this is just the life that you want to live before you get sober, if you're always putting it off. I mean, I've heard from so many women who are like, maybe I should have just waited a couple of more months until I was more financially stable, until I was in a better situation. No, like, today is the best day for you to start finding the lessons in the past and changing your life, because there's a reason that you're feeling a calling to be sober curious or sober. There's definitely a reason behind it, and that voice inside your head is wanting you to do it now, not later or not ever because you feel like you've missed your chance. It's never ever going to be too late.
I just want to add one more thing too, is that it's fun.
It is fun.
It's being in a community and sharing our stories and making it something we can laugh makes everything so much easier. And laughter and joy and sharing our stories and getting on the SoberFitGirl community call, and it just makes the past not so heavy, is when we can have a good laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, bye.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week and we'll have more fun.
Yeah.
Bye.
See you.